I saw a video earlier that I'm going to be splicing in with others and putting on YouTube. These folks are talking about crime, teenagers, and prevention. Now, the number one given thing is a strong family unit. That is so true. But you know what? There is one thing, just that one thing, none of them thought about it. So money had a problem. Programs. Without that one thing, you're still going to have that problem.
To arrest. It also advised to de emphasize some felony crimes, prioritize, quote, restorative justice, and eliminate cash bail. Democrats in North Carolina and nationwide are consumed with pushing a woke, soft on crime agenda, no matter how many innocent Americans suffer as a result. Instead of aggressively prosecuting and locking up violent criminals, the Democrat backed cashless bail approach lets these criminals roam free in our country to offend again and again. These reckless policies have turned too many of American cities into hunting grounds for career criminals who mock our justice system, drain law enforcement resources, and wreak havoc on law abiding citizens. Enough is enough, and that is why President Trump is doing everything in his power by taking action to undo these absurd policies. The president recently signed a powerful executive order directing the AG to submit a list of states and local jurisdictions with cashless bail policies so that the Trump administration may identify federal funds that are being provided to these states and can potentially be suspended or terminated. President Trump firmly believes that to maintain order in public safety, we must incarcerate individuals whose pending criminal charges or criminal history demonstrate a clear, ongoing risk to civil society. This is a common sense and sensible approach that the vast majority of Americans agree with, and it's time for the Democrat Party to get on board with what is right. When these criminals are caught, they must be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law and be sent to prison where they can no longer terrorize our streets. This is the mandate the American people delivered to President Trump, and it's a mandate he intends to fulfill. Staying on the topic of public safety, new preliminary data released today by Customs and Border Protection in August shows that President Trump has delivered the most secure border in American history. For the fourth straight month, 0 illegal aliens were released into the United States by CBP. Nationwide encounters are down 93% below the peak of the Biden administration. Border Patrol apprehensions on the southwest border in the entire month of August were less than what was apprehended in 4 days in August 2024 under the Biden administration. President Trump has ended disastrous Biden illegal alien invasion, and he sealed our border in record time, keeping this central promise he made to the American public. With that, I will take your questions. Here in our new media seat today, we have Michael Schellenberger, who is the founder of Public News with nearly 2 million readers and subscribers. Michael, thank you for being here today. And why don't you kick us off? Sure.
Westmore, in Maryland, people just want people to feel safe in their communities. And there's no question that the president should work with leaders in different states. If he's sending it in the National Guard, that is something that they want. Because I don't think people care anymore about Republican or Democrat, liberal or conservative. They just care about what works. And I think our mayor of Washington, D.C., Muriel Bowser, that I'm just so very proud of, has shown that despite all the friction and all the bannering and its criticism that she received from the president, now he's praising her because they're on the same page. To do what? Protect the everyday lives of American citizens. The National Guard may not be the answer, but the mayor does agree that they need more law enforcement on their ground. And I just wish that we could come to the kind of consensus where people can live without the threat of violence, walking outside and their car is no longer there, or going to their car and they're beaten to death over their car because people want free things. They want free stuff. Violence has to stop. How do we get to that? I think we all can agree that we can lower the the war of words and find a solution. Giuliani showed us how to do it in New York years ago, that you can get this under control. And then you think about this Labor Day weekend, Chicago saw more than 50 people shot, adding to a growing wave of violence we see across America's cities. I mean, Washington, D.C., Baltimore, Memphis, New Orleans, Philadelphia, San Francisco are facing these similar crises. And it's not just red states, it's blue states. We don't care what color you are. We just want to stop. Where crime dominates headlines and communities, they're desperate for solutions. And so today we ask, what's behind this carnage? Who's responsible? And how do we break this cycle and come together as Americans, so Americans like Scott and like Marcus and myself and our guests who live in neighborhoods where we feel safe, or like Michael Lettis, who's founder and president and the CEO of Invest USA, who joins us today, who's got over 30 years of law enforcement, and A. Scott Bolton, my man, nationally recognized attorney, very balanced, prominent political and legal analyst, but he's a prosecutor. He knows exactly that role. And of course, Raynard Jackson, my main man, president and CEO of Raynard Jackson Associates, and Marcus, a former police officer here with the Capitol Hill Police for almost 10 years. So let me start with you, out of respect, Marcus. You are a former police officer. What do? We take all this rhetoric that we've heard from the president, from these leaders around the country. How do we make it work? Public safety, community safety for everyday Americans.
Well, all of you, great to be here. I want to see if you can give some whether the president is considering additional measures against Europe and Brazil, not just for censorship, but also for preventing political candidates from actually competing in elections. We've now seen in Romania, France, and now Germany with Joachim Paul, efforts to basically just prevent candidates from being able to compete in elections. The president has shown some concern around President Bolsonaro, who's being prevented from running. All of this is coming in the context of increased censorship of online platforms, of American platforms, and efforts to censor Americans. I'm personally being investigated under criminal investigation with my Brazilian colleagues for publishing the Twitter Files Brazil. We're very grateful that the president has imposed Magnitsky sanctions on the judge. Is the president considering additional actions, given that it appears that they're going to end up with a conviction against President Bolsonaro, preventing him from running? Is he considering doing anything about this crackdown in Europe? I mean, it's shocking to see Joachim Paul, this mayoral candidate in Germany, the criminal indictment against him cites him, quote, saying that he loves the Lord of the Rings as reason why he's an extremist and shouldn't be able to run. So I just wonder if you could speak to that. And again, I'm grateful to be here. Nice to meet you all. And I'm grateful for what the Trump administration has done to push for free speech abroad.
Well, thanks for being here, Michael. We appreciate it. Freedom of speech is arguably the most important issue of our time. It is enshrined in our Constitution, and the president believes in it strongly. He himself faced censorship in his road back to this beautiful Oval Office here in Washington, D.C., so he takes this very seriously, as does, I know, the Vice President of the United States and the entire Trump administration, which is why we have taken significant action with regards to Brazil in the form of both sanctions and also leveraging the use of tariffs to ensure that countries around the world are not punishing their citizens in this way. And at the same time, the president is, while he's leveraging the United States to safeguard our interests abroad, he's also making sure that freedom of speech remains here in the United States of America. So I don't have any additional actions to preview for you today, but I can tell you this is a priority for the administration, and the president is unafraid to use the economic might, the military might of the United States of America to protect free speech around the world. Sure.
Quick follow-up, which is just, there was a Reuters story saying that the Trump administration was looking at this Europe-U.S. trade deal as one of the sticking points, this issue of the censorship, not just of U.S. platforms, of Americans. Do you have any updates on how those trade talks are going? And I also wonder if the president is concerned about NATO membership requirements.
Sure. I think that's the question that we're all looking for. But one thing that we can recognize, Armstrong, is that we do have a problem. Even though we may not agree on the solution, or whether it's the National Guard or bringing federal agents into Washington, D.C. right now, we can all agree that we do have a problem. And as I've always known, while I was an officer on the Capitol Hill Police, and when I was a sheriff's deputy, what I've always known was, once you stop the major crimes, everything else kind of trickles down. The minor crimes, people stop doing some of the main things. And just going back to the broken windows theory, once you clean up all of the blocks and board up all of the houses right here on the block, it stops a lot of minor crimes and major crimes.
Scott?
Yeah, I think we know the solution because it's worked in other cities. It's worked over time. It's a continuum of care of our community. One is community policing, is crime prevention as opposed to crime solving. That is, there's $100 million in federal funds that the House and Senate won't pass out that was designated just for the District of Columbia for community policing, public-private partnerships, religious organizations, crime prevention, community organizations, and giving young people an alternative to crime and violence. If they're the least lost and left out, if they're in poor areas, and that's what they are around, if you will. But I must tell you, crime is in every neighborhood. I live in Chevy Chase, D.C. I live in the Palisades, and people's cars get car boosted and stolen, even in those, quote, high rent districts, if you will. And so it's not just more police. It's community police and training them. I welcome federal support for all of these cities, but let's not make it political. Let's put it in red cities and blue cities and coordinate with the leadership and then release those community crime prevention funds so that they can get into getting alternatives to young people so that if they've got a choice between violence and jobs and job training, entrepreneurship training, or working with community organizations to make themselves and their lives better. We haven't talked about family. I know, Armstrong, you're big on family. I agree with you on this, building a stronger family unit. And so if we can do those things, then we can bring crime down. But the problem is this, whether you're Republican or Democrat, taking care of poor people, preventing crime, making people feel safe. I don't care about the crime numbers. We agree on that too. But it's expensive. It is an expensive proposition. And so in 30 days or so, or next week when the feds have to leave D.C., unless the House acts, how long can you keep them there? I think it costs like $1 million a day or some extravagant number just to have the feds here, even if they're just in a support role. And so when you talk about America feeling safe, how much is America willing to spend to feel safe?
Scott raises a very interesting point. When the National Guard is no longer here, how do you maintain this level of almost non-existent homicide, car thefts, carjacking, rape, pillaging of communities? How is that done? I know Rudy Giuliani showed us the way in New York, but how do we do it around the rest of the country?
Well, first of all, I think, I love what Scott said. I love what Marcus said. But let's make sure we focus on the topic that we're talking about here, law enforcement from this standpoint. You have had such success at DC because you've had what we call a show of force. And the show of force is indicated that we are committed to making sure that there is accountability for your actions. Let's take a look at some of the numbers that we've seen in the past. We had just 4 or 5 years ago, we had roughly 1.4 million sworn officers across the country. In January, we were down to roughly 659, 700,000 officers. That's almost half the force nationwide. It's gone. You cannot provide effective law enforcement and effective protection to your community with those numbers. So what are we doing? Well, we're doing the right thing now. We're making sure we show our support, which we should have done all along for our first responders. Take a look at what we ask out of them. We ask them to put their lives on the line. Not very many people are willing to do that, by the way. It takes a very special person to be that committed to wanting his community to succeed, that he's willing to give his life for it. So we don't even recognize that. We don't pay him. I mean, let's just be very blunt. When you average out across the country, yes, there are some high districts where they're paid well, but the vast majority, 80% of law enforcement, have to live almost hand to mouth. That's atrocious in this country. We're talking about putting in the resources. I thought it was interesting, Scott. You raised a very, very valid point. We're willing to put billions, if not trillions of dollars to other countries across the globe to make sure that they're safe, but we're not willing to invest the same for our own people. We have got to come to the realization that it's time to concentrate on America and its citizens first and foremost, and do what is necessary to what the Constitution guarantees. The Constitution, the preamble says we're supposed to provide for the common defense. We're supposed to let Americans feel safe when they walk out to the park or they walk out to the grocery store. That's a fundamental right this Constitution guarantees. So we should be willing to pay for what we have already been promising the American people for 250 years. And that is where we begin to have to dedicate our resources to making sure, first of all, that they're properly paid. Second of all, that they're properly equipped. I mean, we've got officers on there. I was amazed at the Minneapolis shooting. If you watch that video, we had the officers I give them great credit. Fantastic response time. They immediately jumped out. The call came out, active shooter. They didn't know if the shooter had already committed suicide or not. They jumped out of those vehicles. If you look at those videos, probably 60 to 70% didn't have active shooter vests. So they're running into a situation when they know good and well that if he's still alive, he has the advantage. That's just horrible in America today. That should have never occurred. And so we got to do that. We've also got, I love what you said, Scott, we've got to deal with our youth. This is becoming a very problematic issue in this country. Because, you know, if we take away all the crime today, but we don't teach and don't train our young people and don't reach out and, as you said, make them feel like they can be productive members of society, we're going to have the same problem 2 years down the road, even worse. And so it can't be one or the other. It has to be a total unified program. And that's what I think sometimes we miss on the Hill. Sometimes I think Washington gets wrapped up into one solution when it's all got to come together. We have to have judicial reform. You're a former prosecutor. You know how frustrating it is to arrest somebody and see them leave before you can get out of the office yourself and fill out the paperwork. We have got to have judicial reform as well, and we've got to make sure that we put all these programs synchronated. And we've got to make sure that they're all happening at the same time. And quite frankly, I haven't seen anybody step forward to do that just yet.
Renard?
Armstrong, the single biggest thing we can do, if I was president, you asked me to wave a magic wand, until we reconstitute the family unit, all the other things we're talking about, midnight basketball, and we don't need to take care of the poor, Armstrong. We need to create opportunities for the poor to help themselves. Democrats typically, Armstrong, measure success by how many people need government programs. Conservatives measure success by how few people need these government programs. But until we reconstitute the family unit, Armstrong, I challenge your audience to find me one thriving society that has a low crime rate without an intact nuclear family. And until we address that issue, Armstrong, all the other pie in the sky stuff we're talking about will not work.
So Renard, let me just stay with you. When you compare Chicago with Washington, D.C., Baltimore, and Memphis, do you see the same root cause or unique local issues? Based on what you just said, it's a combo of all the things that you just mentioned.
Well, notice that most of these activities in D.C. and Chicago are by teenage males, black males, who almost without exception, Armstrong, come from single-parent homes. And either the mother is working 3 or 4 jobs to try to, pay her bills for the family, or the mother who is the custodian of the child. In most cases, they are not actively involved in that kid because, Armstrong, you cannot have a female trying to contain and control a 14, 15-year-old teenager male with all this testosterone raging, and there's no male figure, whether it's the father, the basketball coach, or the local track coach. There's got to be a male influence, and preferably in the family unit. And so there are direct parallels between D.C. and Chicago, and all the pathologies are the same. Single-parent household, no father involved in these kids' lives, and no direction and no hope of opportunity for these young teenagers who are committing all these crimes. That's what has to be done to rectify this problem.
Well, hold on, I'm going to take a break.
Please let me have it. Please let me respond.
I will. I'll give him all. It's yours when we come back. We got to take a break. Don't go away.